Long before crowns were placed upon her head, before royal scribes recorded her name, before her voice would echo through the halls of power, she lived unseen. She was born into a conquered people. The land beneath her feet was not her own. The language spoken around her was foreign. The empire that ruled her life had no knowledge of her God and no concern for her future. She was a Jewish girl living in exile, in the great Persian city of Susa, a city of towering walls, guarded gates, and the ever-present reminder that she was a stranger in a powerful land. Her parents were gone, taken by time, by hardship, by a world that offered little mercy to the weak. No songs were sung over her childhood, no inheritance waited for her. She was an orphan. Among thousands who walked the crowded streets of Susa each day, she was invisible, another face among the powerless, another life shaped by survival. But heaven does not measure significance the way empires do. For even in exile, even in loss, even in silence, God was watching. And in the life of this forgotten girl, a destiny was quietly beginning to breathe. Her only family was her cousin Mordecai, a man of quiet strength and unshakable faith. Though not wealthy or noble, Mordecai was rich in wisdom that he taught Esther the stories of her people, how God delivered Abraham, Joseph, Moses, and David. He told her that even when God seems silent, he is never absent. Every day, he walked her through the crowded streets of Susa, pointing out dangers, teaching prudence, instilling courage. That he told her to keep her identity hidden among strangers, and she obeyed, learning the power of discretion. By night, under the flickering glow of oil lamps, Mordecai's words became seeds of faith in Esther's heart. She prayed, though silently, learning that even a small voice can be heard in heaven. Though the city slept, unseen, a divine plan was preparing her for greatness. For in the quiet corners of Susa, a young girl was being shaped to stand before kings, to speak truth, and to change the destiny of her people. Outside Esther's modest life, the Persian Empire stretched farther than the eye could see. From India to Ethiopia, its banners flew in every province. King Xerxes reigned with absolute authority. His word was law, his commands shaped nations. His armies were unmatched, his wealth unmeasured. In the capital city of Susa, marble towers glistened in sunlight, golden gates opened to courtyards filled with fountains and gardens. The streets were crowded with traders, soldiers, and nobles. The people moved in rhythm to the empire's power, each step measured by the unyielding pulse of a king. And in the midst of it all, an orphan girl walked quietly, unaware that her life was about to collide with the corridors of power. In the heart of Susa, within walls of polished marble and gold, King Xerxes held court. Tall, broad, and imposing, he commanded attention without speaking. Every gesture, every glance, reflected wealth and authority. Jewels caught the sunlight, embroidered robes swished against the floor. Nobles bowed, generals whispered, scribes recorded. The king's presence was an event in itself, a daily reminder to the world that power belongs to those who dare to claim it. And yet, even in his grandeur, vanity hid behind the crown. For pride, like a shadow, follows the one who loves himself too much. To demonstrate the full scope of his kingdom, Xerxes ordered a grand feast. For 180 days, gold tables groaned under wine and food, silks and jewelry sparkled in torchlight, music, laughter, and conversation filled the air. Yet among the merriment, danger lurked in pride. For a king who trusts only his own glory forgets the power of truth and courage. Little did Xerxes know, this celebration of excess would set the stage for the courage of one young girl, one who would be hidden from view but chosen for greatness. On the 7th day of the king's extravagant feast, Wine had loosened tongues, laughter rolled like waves, and the air was heavy with indulgence. King Xerxes, seated on his golden throne, called for Queen Vashti to appear. He demanded that she wear her royal crown, not for council, not for ceremony, but to be admired, paraded before the men of the empire. But Vashti, proud and dignified, stood firm within her private chambers. She would not be objectified, nor would she bow to the arrogance of drunken praise. "No," she said, not a single word, simple yet powerful, that it echoed in the halls of the palace like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Xerxes' pride shattered. His face burned with anger, humiliation, and wounded ego. For the first time in his life, his will had been directly opposed, and it threatened his authority. Humiliated before his court, King Xerxes' anger was a storm that he paced, clenched fists, eyes flashing with fury. The king's advisors, wise in the ways of governance but fearful of the king's wrath, spoke carefully. Point 1, Memucan warned, "If word of this defiance spreads, all women will dishonor their husbands." Fear and politics collided. A solution was needed. Point 1, that would preserve the king's pride and assert his authority across all 127 provinces. A royal edict was drafted. Queen Vashti was removed from her position. The throne remained, but the crown was empty. And so, the law of the king became unchangeable, sealed with the signet ring. No appeal could be made. No pardon offered. Queen Vashti was removed, her name erased from the palace records, her crown left to gather dust. The law was clear: every man should rule his own household. Disobedience would no longer be tolerated. Yet in the shadows of power, a divine hand was already at work. For every human plan born from pride, God's purpose is quietly woven beneath it. The throne may stand empty, the law may be rigid, but destiny moves unseen. As the throne stood empty, advisors proposed a solution. "Bring young, beautiful virgins from every province," they said. "Prepare them for the king's gaze, and he shall choose a queen." Messengers rode across deserts, rivers, and mountains, collecting maidens from every corner of the empire. They came from India, from Ethiopia, from towns and villages the king would never see. Among them was Hadassah, known by her Persian name, Esther, a young Jewish girl, humble and unassuming, raised by Mordecai with love and faith. She would be taken from the only life she had ever known and brought into the gilded corridors of power. Yet her heart remained steadfast. Though the palace promised splendor, her soul was guided by the quiet wisdom Mordecai had instilled. Esther was escorted into the palace by Haggai, keeper of the women. The halls were filled with gold and velvet, tapestries depicting battles and victories, candelabras reflecting dancing light across polished floors. She was no longer an orphan in the streets of Susa. Now, she was among the chosen. Yet she did not demand attention. She moved with humility, eyes wide but steady, mind quietly prepared to follow Mordecai's counsel. For 12 months, she would be groomed, bathed in oils and perfumes, taught the customs and rituals of the palace. Her beauty was noted, but it was her grace, her humility, that made her truly stand out. God's favor, unseen, had begun to shine upon her. As the days unfolded, Esther did not seek grandeur. She moved with humility, respect, and quiet dignity, qualities that drew attention where beauty alone could not. Haggai, the keeper of the women, noticed her immediately. Her obedience, poise, and gentle manners set her apart. God's unseen hand was at work. Every gesture, every word, every quiet act became a thread in a tapestry that no mortal eye could fully comprehend. The palace, full of luxury and ambition, would become the stage for a young girl to rise above circumstance, not through pride, but through favor, grace, and destiny. For 12 full months, Esther underwent a meticulous preparation. Her skin was nourished with oils and lotions, her hair groomed and scented, her manners refined, her knowledge of court etiquette sharpened. Yet she never lost herself in vanity. Her eyes remained bright with wisdom and faith, her lips untouched by arrogance. The other maidens came and went, some rising, some fading into obscurity, but Esther's quiet strength endured, a light among the splendor, a seed of destiny quietly growing within the palace walls. While Esther's beauty and grace were being refined, Mordecai stood at the king's gate. Not as a noble, not as a soldier, but as a vigilant servant, observing all who came and went. Royal officials, merchants, guards, all passed through his watchful eyes. Though he seemed ordinary, God had placed him there with purpose. Every whisper of treachery, every hint of danger, was a thread he could catch before disaster struck. The empire might boast power and gold, but Mordecai's loyalty and vigilance would soon play a pivotal role in the salvation of his people. Among the gathered maidens, some whispered with envy, their eyes narrow, their words sharp. The palace was a world of beauty and ambition, where smiles could hide ambition and every gesture could carry deceit. Yet Esther remained steadfast, not engaging in gossip, not seeking favoritism. Her focus was on grace, on wisdom, and on following Mordecai's counsel. Unseen by all, God's favor continued to rest upon her, turning humility into influence, preparing her for the moment when courage would be required. Though no one could see it, God's hand moved quietly in the palace. Every smile that favored Esther, every gesture that elevated her position, was not by chance. The king's eyes would eventually rest upon her, and when that day came, she would speak with courage, stand for truth, and save her people. In the corridors of gold and marble, a quiet girl of humble beginnings was being positioned for greatness. The world saw only the surface, but God saw the heart, and in that heart, a destiny was taking shape. The day finally came. Esther, dressed in robes of modest elegance, stood before the throne of King Xerxes. Her heart raced, yet her gaze was steady. She was no longer a street orphan. She was a girl poised by destiny, guided by the faith Mordecai had instilled. The king's eyes fell upon her. In that moment, time seemed to pause. The hush swept across the court. She did not need to speak. Her humility, grace, and inner strength were louder than words. God's favor, unseen yet undeniable, was already working in hearts and minds. And the king was captivated. Xerxes could not look away at Esther. He saw something beyond beauty, poise, wisdom, and a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Her modesty contrasted sharply with the other women of the court, and that difference drew the king like a magnet. In a single glance, he understood that this was not just another maiden. This was someone unique, chosen by forces beyond the walls of Susa. The courtiers whispered, the guards shifted uneasily, but the king's mind remained fixed, his heart quietly stirred. The king's heart was made certain that he placed the royal crown upon Esther's head, making her queen in place of Vashti. A royal banquet was held in her honor, music swelling, candles flickering, banners waving. Gifts were sent across the empire, and celebrations erupted in distant provinces. Yet Esther's heart remained humble. She did not forget her people, nor the God who had quietly guided her to this moment. The crown upon her head was not merely gold. It was a symbol of divine purpose fulfilled. Word of the new queen spread like wildfire. From India to Ethiopia, provinces rejoiced. Festivals were held, gifts exchanged, songs sung. Yet beneath the revelry, an invisible hand was weaving the threads of a larger plan. For the queen's rise was not only for celebration, but for the protection of a people whose fate had once been shadowed by despair. God's fingerprints were everywhere, though unseen by mortal eyes. While the empire celebrated, Mordecai remained at the king's gate. Though his niece was queen, his duty did not waver. He observed the flow of courtiers, the whispers of officials, and the subtle shifts in power that could threaten the king or the people. His loyalty was quiet, steadfast, a shield unseen but crucial. For the storms to come, for the plots of Haman, and for the salvation of the Jews, Mordecai's vigilance would be essential. One day, as Mordecai sat at his usual post at the king's gate, he overheard whispers of danger. Two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, spoke in hushed, angry tones. Their voices were low, but the words carried weight. They plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai's heart raced. He could not ignore this treachery. Though the conspirators thought themselves clever, God had placed a vigilant guardian in their path. Mordecai did not hesitate. He sent word immediately to Queen Esther, knowing her access to the king could save his life. Esther received the message with quiet composure, aware that the risk of approach was grave. Yet she trusted the guidance she had received from Mordecai. Faith, wisdom, and courage must guide her actions. The palace walls, once symbols of splendor, now held the weight of life and death. God's unseen hand moved in the courage of a single woman. Esther's heart trembled, but fear did not bind her. She sent word back to Mordecai, "Gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for me for 3 days, that I will go to the king, even if it costs me my life." She had chosen faith over fear, courage over comfort, and as she dressed in her royal robes, she embraced the possibility of sacrifice. For the first time, the queen would stand not for herself, but for an entire people. Meanwhile, King Xerxes promoted Haman the Agagitito, the highest rank among his officials. All were ordered to bow before him, but Mordecai refused. Haman's anger burned. That it was not just resentment. It was a deep, personal hatred, and it soon became a deadly obsession. The fate of an entire people would hinge on the courage of one queen and the vigilance of one man at the king's gate. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide life and death. Haman, unaware of Mordecai's loyalty, plotted the destruction of all Jews in the empire. The lot, or pure, was cast to determine the day of destruction. Yet even in the shadow of fear, God's unseen hand continued to work. The queen's courage, the servant's vigilance, and the divine orchestration would soon converge. What was intended for death would be turned toward life. A story of salvation, reversal, and divine destiny was quietly unfolding. Esther, now queen in the full glory of her robes and crown, prepared a banquet, not for pleasure, but for purpose. Every detail mattered: the golden plates, the wine, the placement of guests, even the subtle glances between her and the king. Her mind was sharp, her heart steady, aware that this banquet could change the fate of her people. This was the beginning of her courageous stand, where wisdom, timing, and faith would converge. King Xerxes entered the banquet, his eyes scanning the room, uncertain, restless, yet intrigued. Esther observed every subtle reaction, every furrowed brow, every fleeting smile. She knew the right moment was crucial. Words spoken too soon could bring ruin, words spoken too late might miss the chance. With quiet confidence, she prepared to speak when destiny called, trusting God's unseen hand to guide her. Haman, emboldened by his recent promotion, strutted through the palace corridors. He imagined himself untouchable, every eye bowing, every official obeying. But one man, Mordecai, refused to kneel, and that single act of defiance ignited a fire within Haman's heart. Pride, anger, and obsession intertwined that a plot began to form, dark and deadly, against the very people Esther would one day save. Mordecai's eyes never wavered. He noticed Haman's striding arrogance, the whispering of officials who feared yet obeyed him. The threat was subtle, hidden beneath smiles and silk, but Mordecai's vigilance did not falter. He understood that the king's favor could not protect the innocent forever, and that courage, timing, and wisdom must prevail. Every observation, every note, every thought prepared him to act at the precise moment. As the banquets continued and Haman's pride swelled, the threads of destiny tightened. The queen, poised and courageous, would soon speak her heart. The servant at the gate remained vigilant, and the one who sought to destroy a people would face a reversal that no man could foresee. What was meant for destruction was being quietly woven into a story of salvation, a story that would echo through generations as Purim, a festival of life, courage, and divine reversal. At the second banquet, Esther rose with quiet resolve. Her eyes met King Xerxes, steady and unwavering. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "I have found favor in your sight, and I beg you, grant me my life and the lives of my people." The room fell silent, every ear strained, every gaze fixed. The queen, once hidden, now revealed herself and her people. The weight of her words hung in the air, and the palace waited, breathless. Esther pointed directly at Haman. "The adversary and enemy is this wicked man." Gasps filled the hall. That Haman's face went pale. The arrogance that had once emboldened him now froze in terror. King Xerxes rose from his throne, his anger a storm barely contained. Haman, once the highest official in the land, realized the depth of his downfall. The plotting that had threatened an entire people was about to unravel in an instant. Xerxes stormed out of the hall to cool his fury. The palace trembled under his rage. Haman, terrified, realized the trap he had walked into. The man who had sought to destroy Mordecai and his people was now powerless. The king's wrath, swift and unstoppable, was about to rewrite the fate of the empire. Haman's fate was sealed. That he was led to the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The crowd watched in silence, the man who had plotted death now meeting it himself. In that moment, justice was swift and clear. What was meant for destruction was turned to deliverance, and the hearts of the faithful rejoiced silently even before the formal celebration began. With Haman gone, King Xerxes bestowed his signet ring and full authority upon Mordecai. The man who had once sat quietly at the king's gate was now second only to the king himself. He wore royal robes of blue and white, his face calm, his heart devoted to justice and peace. Through courage, wisdom, and faith, Mordecai's vigilance had not only saved a life, but had delivered an entire people. God's unseen hand had woven salvation through the actions of the humble, the faithful, and the brave. Though Haman was dead, his first decree could not be undone. Esther approached King Xerxes once more, not for her own life, but for the lives of her people. "Your Majesty," she pleaded, "grant us the right to defend ourselves against those who would destroy us." The king listened and granted her request. Royal scribes immediately wrote a new decree, sealed with the king's ring, empowering the Jews across the empire to defend their families. Across the empire, Jews received the decree with hope and resolve. They donned armor and sharpened weapons, their hearts steeled for the battles ahead. Though fear had once gripped them, now courage and unity flourished. Mordecai and Esther had provided not just a decree, but the spark for a collective courage that would turn despair into strength. In Susa, 800 men and the 10 sons of Haman stood ready to attack the Jews. But courage and faith prevailed. Haman's sons, notorious and wicked, fell to the defenders' might. Justice was swift. The enemies of God's people were defeated, and the kingdom witnessed the power of righteousness over malice and pride. Across the empire, 75,000 enemies fell. The Jews had fought not for greed, but for survival, for justice, for life. Where mourning had filled the streets, now light and joy returned. Grief turned to celebration, and families rejoiced in the safety granted by God's unseen hand. To honor the deliverance, the Jews established a festival called Purim. Each year, on the 14th and 15th of Adar, they would feast, rejoice, send gifts to one another, and give generously to the poor. A day once marked for death had become a day of life. Mourning had turned to joy, grief to celebration, and the story of Esther, courage, and divine reversal would echo through generations forever. In the quiet after the celebrations, the palace walls still whispered of courage, of a young orphan girl who rose to become queen, and a humble man at the gate who dared to stand for truth. Esther's wisdom, humility, and courage had shaped the fate of a nation. That Mordecai's unwavering vigilance and righteousness had turned peril into salvation. The empire would remember not just the battles won, but the hearts that chose integrity over fear, faith over silence, and courage over convenience. This was the quiet triumph of the humble, a legacy etched into the annals of history and the very soul of a people. Beyond the palace, the streets of Susa hummed with life. Families gathered under the fading sun, their laughter echoing across stone courtyards, a melody of resilience and newfound hope. Children ran with bright eyes, clutching gifts and scrolls of the new decree. The elders spoke softly, retelling the story of deliverance, their voices layered with awe, gratitude, and reverence. The air was alive with remembrance, every smile, every embrace, every act of generosity echoing the truth. What had been meant for destruction was turned into a story of salvation. Though his name was never spoken, God's presence was undeniable. Every twist of fate, every moment of courage, every act of wisdom was quietly guided by an unseen hand. The walls of the palace, the gate at which Mordecai sat, the banquet tables, the royal decrees, all were threads in a tapestry of divine orchestration. What had appeared as coincidence, as luck, was in reality a meticulously woven plan, turning despair into hope, danger into salvation, and ordinary people into instruments of extraordinary purpose. The story of Esther and Mordecai became more than history. It became a lesson, a living testimony of courage, wisdom, and faith. Young women saw the queen and learned that humility and grace could shape destiny. Young men saw Mordecai and understood that integrity and vigilance could change the course of kingdoms. Every conversation, every tale shared in hushed reverence, passed the torch of courage to the next generation, reminding all who listened that the ordinary, when guided by faith, could accomplish the extraordinary. And so the story of Esther reminds us, even when God seems silent, he is never absent. Even when the odds are insurmountable, when danger looms and courage falters, he is already at work. Perhaps, like Esther, you are where you are for such a time as this. Chosen, positioned, and called. A life of faith, of courage, of wisdom can alter destinies, save lives, and leave a legacy that echoes far beyond our years. For the God who reversed the fate of a nation still writes stories of redemption today, and yours could be next. The first Purim dawned across the Persian Empire. The city of Susa awoke not to fear, but to light, soft golden sun illuminating streets now alive with laughter. Women hung colorful banners, embroidered with symbols of hope and salvation. Children ran through stone alleys, their footsteps echoing like a joyous drumbeat. Families prepared tables of food, baskets of gifts, and jars of sweet wine, not for vanity, but to honor the memory of courage, faith, and deliverance. The air was thick with gratitude. Every glance, every smile, every embrace whispered the truth. God's unseen hand had orchestrated salvation, turning mourning into music, despair into celebration, and loss into life. Purim was not merely a feast, it was an expression of gratitude, a living testament to faith, courage, and the power of communal unity. Neighbors exchanged gifts with warm smiles, and the poor were not forgotten. Bread, fruit, wine, and cloth were given freely, not as duty, but as a celebration of life restored. From the humblest home to the grandest palace, the city thrummed with laughter, storytelling, and music. Stories of bravery were retold, not as tales of mere survival, but as echoes of divine providence, reminding all that ordinary people, guided by faith, could achieve the extraordinary. As the day progressed, quiet moments of reflection emerged. Elders and parents gathered children under the shade of stone archways, retelling the story of Esther and Mordecai with reverent detail. Every twist of fate, every narrow escape, every act of courage was described not as chance, but as the deliberate work of an unseen hand. Look closely, they said, at the lives of the humble and faithful. See how God moves silently, unseen, yet perfectly orchestrates every event. What seems impossible to us is already in His hands. What feels like silence may be the calm before redemption. From that day forward, the story of Esther and Mordecai became more than history. It became a living lesson, whispered in homes, taught in schools, and celebrated in festivals. Young girls learned the power of humility, grace, and faith in shaping destiny. Young boys learned that courage, integrity, and steadfastness could alter the fate of kingdoms. Generations remembered that the ordinary, when guided by wisdom and devotion, could rise to extraordinary purpose. Purim was not just a celebration of survival, but a festival of character, courage, and the quiet but undeniable hand of God. And so, the story of Esther echoes through the ages. Even when God seems silent, He is always present. Even when the odds are overwhelming, when fear grips the heart, He moves with purpose and precision. Perhaps, like Esther, you too are where you are for such a time as this. Every act of courage, every choice of integrity, every whisper of faith can ripple across generations. The God who saved a nation through the courage of a hidden queen still writes stories of redemption today, and yours could be next. The city of Susa was transformed. Stone streets echoed with joyous footsteps and vibrant laughter. Children raced through alleys, waving colorful banners and spinning tops. Merchants called out their wares, offering food, sweets, and toys. Music floated through the air, blending the melody of drums, flutes, and strings, each note a celebration of deliverance and life restored. The festival was more than merriment. It was a living tapestry woven from courage, faith, and the legacy of those who dared to act. Every laugh, every song, every gesture whispered, God's hand is at work, and hope always prevails. As the day unfolded, the sounds of celebration deepened. Drums beat steadily, flutes sang melodies of victory, and stringed instruments wove intricate harmonies that lifted the heart. Men and women danced in circles, spinning with abandon, while elders retold the tale of Esther's courage, Mordecai's loyalty, and the miraculous reversal of fortune. Even the youngest children listened wide-eyed, learning that faith and bravery were far more powerful than any sword or crown. In every movement, every note, every smile, the city remembered that salvation often comes through unseen hands, through the humble, the faithful, and the brave. Amid the laughter and dancing, moments of quiet reflection emerged. Families gathered to share meals, offering thanks not only for survival, but for the guidance and protection that had carried them through peril. Bread was broken and wine shared, gifts exchanged, and prayers whispered. Elders reminded children that Purim was not merely a holiday, but a reminder of courage, faith, and the importance of speaking truth even when the world demands silence. The festival became a living memorial, a rhythm of remembrance, joy, and devotion, honoring God's unseen orchestration and celebrating the ordinary hearts chosen to do extraordinary things. As night approached, the city quieted, but the story endured by firesides, in courtyards, and beneath arches. The tale of Esther and Mordecai was whispered from one generation to the next. Young girls imagined themselves as queens of courage, young boys as defenders of justice, and all understood that ordinary people, guided by faith, could alter the fate of kingdoms. Purim became more than a festival. It became a living testament at a celebration of hope, courage, and divine orchestration that could not be erased by time, fear, or adversity. As the night embraced Susa, the city shimmered with the glow of lanterns, the laughter of families, and the quiet echoes of faith. Esther and Mordecai, standing apart yet together, observed the legacy they had shaped. The people had survived, thrived, and celebrated. The festival of Purim became a symbol that what was meant for destruction could be turned into life, that despair could be transformed into hope, and that God's unseen hand moved in every corner of history. Perhaps you too are where you are for such a time as this. Your courage, your faith, your voice could shape destinies, save lives, and leave a legacy that echoes far beyond your years. The God who reversed the fate of a nation still writes stories of redemption today, and your story could be next. Night fell over Susa, yet the city glowed, not from torches alone, but from hearts filled with hope and gratitude. Lanterns flickered along stone streets, casting gentle shadows that danced like the memories of past courage. Children laughed, chasing one another in playful reverence, while elders spoke quietly of Esther's faith, Mordecai's vigilance, and the miracles that had saved a people. Even in darkness, the light of redemption shone brightly. Every laugh, every whisper, every tear of joy reminded the city that God's unseen hand moves in silence, guiding lives towards salvation and purpose. In the quiet of her chambers, Queen Esther stood alone, crown resting lightly upon her head, eyes lifting to the horizon. She remembered the journey from orphaned exile to queen, every choice weighed with courage, every prayer whispered in secret. She thought of Mordecai, steadfast at the gate, and the Jewish people who had fasted and prayed alongside her. Though unseen, she felt the presence of God guiding every step. The palace was silent, but her heart echoed with the rhythm of faith. For even when no eyes watched and no lips spoke, courage and devotion ripple through history, changing the course of nations, shaping destinies, and leaving legacies that endure beyond lifetimes. At the gate of the palace, Mordecai stood vigilant, his eyes scanning the city with quiet purpose. He remembered the plot that nearly destroyed the king, the pride and wrath of Haman, and the courage of Esther. Though he had received honor, he sought no glory for himself. His reward was in faithfulness, integrity, and the knowledge that God's plans often unfold beyond human eyes. As the moonlight touched the stone paths, he smiled, knowing that obedience, courage, and wisdom had safeguarded an entire people. Even in silence, the faithful leave footprints that guide generations. Across Susa, the festival continued deep into the night. Children carried lanterns like tiny stars, their laughter blending with the rhythm of distant drums. Families danced in courtyards, yet paused often to recount the story of courage, faith, and divine intervention. The city was alive with contrasts, exuberant joy intertwined with quiet reverence. Every gesture, every song, every whispered tale reminded all who listened that salvation often comes through unseen hands, through ordinary people made extraordinary, through courage, prayer, and the steady pulse of faith. And so, the story of Esther and Mordecai draws to its close. The king's palace stands in quiet grandeur, but the true power lies not in gold or crowns, but in courage, faith, and the unwavering commitment to righteousness. Every city street, every home, every lantern-lit courtyard echoes the timeless truth. Even in silence, God is present. Even in fear, courage can shine. Even in the face of darkness, hope endures. Perhaps you too are where you are, for such a time as this. Your courage, your faith, your integrity can change lives, shape destinies, and leave a legacy that reaches far beyond your lifetime. The God who saved a nation through an orphaned girl still writes stories of redemption today, and yours could be next. In the stillness of her private chamber, Queen Esther knelt. The weight of the kingdom, the safety of her people, and the fragile hope of a nation rested in her heart. She whispered a prayer, not for glory or comfort, but for courage to act, wisdom to speak, and the strength to endure whatever may come. Every breath carried faith, every heartbeat echoed trust. Though no one watched, she knew she was not alone. The God who guided her steps from orphan to queen listened, unseen, orchestrating events with precision. Her prayer was a silent symphony of devotion, a reminder that true courage begins in the heart, and the quietest voice can alter the course of history. At the palace gate, Mordecai remained alert. Though honored publicly, his heart carried humility, not pride. That he remembered every peril the people faced, every silent prayer answered, and every moment when courage, faith, and obedience had saved lives. He observed the city under the night sky, lanterns flickering like stars. Every shadow reminded him of the hidden ways God works, turning despair into hope, treachery into justice, and ordinary lives into instruments of salvation. Mordecai's steadfast presence was a beacon, a quiet, unwavering testimony that faithfulness has power even when unnoticed. Throughout Susa, the festival continued, blending joy with reverence. Families sang hymns of praise, children raced through lantern-lit streets, and neighbors shared meals and gifts. Stories of Esther's courage and Mordecai's wisdom were retold, each retelling a lesson in faith, integrity, and the quiet power of obedience. Even in laughter, the people remembered, salvation is often hidden, faith is tested in silence, and courage shines brightest when the stakes are highest. Susa was alive, not merely with celebration, but with the enduring pulse of divine providence. From that night forward, the story of Esther and Mordecai became eternal. Children dressed in crowns, imagining themselves as bearers of courage, elders spoke of faith and bravery, inspiring the next generation. Purim was no longer just a festival. It was a covenant of hope. That it whispered that ordinary people, guided by faith and integrity, could rise to extraordinary purpose. That courage, once sown, blooms through generations, and that God's unseen hand orchestrates every act of devotion towards salvation and justice. And so, the story concludes with a timeless truth. Even when silence reigns, God is present. Even when fear grips the heart, courage can rise. Even when darkness looms, hope endures. Perhaps, like Esther, You are placed where you are for such a time as this. Every act of faith, every word of truth, every brave choice can ripple through history, save lives, and leave a legacy that outlives kingdoms and generations. The God who delivered a nation through the faith of an orphaned girl still moves in unseen ways today. And your story, your moment of courage, may be the next act of divine redemption. The first rays of dawn spilled over Susa, bathing the city in gold and rose. Every rooftop, every tower, every stone seemed to glow with the memory of deliverance. Children greeted the morning with laughter, chasing shadows and weaving through streets, their tiny footsteps echoing hope. Elders, wrapped in Persian shawls, shared quiet smiles of gratitude, knowing the city had been preserved not by power or wealth, but by courage, prayer, and unwavering faith. Even the winds seemed to whisper the truth. God's unseen hand moves in the smallest moments, and what appears ordinary can become extraordinary. Outside the city walls, nature itself seemed to join in celebration. Rivers sparkled in the morning sun, reflecting the sky's brilliance. Birds sang melodies that carried through the hills, as if heralding a victory unseen yet profoundly felt. Trees swayed gently, leaves catching the light in shimmering patterns, and flowers opened their petals wide, vibrant with life. The world, even in its quiet corners, testified to the orchestration of the divine, a reminder that every act of courage and faith echoes through creation itself. Inside homes and courtyards, families gathered to recount the tale of Esther and Mordecai. Children leaned in close, wide-eyed, imagining themselves in the queen's place. The elders spoke with a reverent cadence, emphasizing courage, humility, and faith. Even the smallest act of bravery, they said, can ripple through time, altering destinies, protecting lives, and honoring God. The story became more than a memory. It became a guide for living, a moral compass that transcended generations. In laughter, in prayer, in quiet reflection, the spirit of Esther's courage lived on. As the sun climbed higher, the city hummed with gratitude. Merchants gave freely, neighbors embraced, and musicians played songs of triumph. Every act of generosity, every smile, every prayer was a living reminder of deliverance and divine providence. Even strangers joined in, sharing food, gifts, and songs. The city was a tapestry of human kindness and heavenly orchestration, woven together by courage, faith, and the enduring memory of a queen who dared to act. And as the day came to its full circle, the city glowed with life, laughter, and remembrance. Esther and Mordecai watched quietly from afar, their hearts content in the knowledge that faith and courage had triumphed. The festival of Purim would continue for generations, a living testament that God works through the unseen, that ordinary lives can shape extraordinary destinies, and that hope, courage, and devotion never fade. Perhaps you too are called to stand for such a time as this. Your moment of courage, your word of truth, your act of faith could be the next instrument of divine redemption. In the stillness of the evening, Queen Esther returned to her chambers. The crown glimmered faintly in the candlelight, yet it was not power that warmed her heart. It was purpose. She reflected on her journey, from orphan to hidden servant, to a queen entrusted with life itself. Every trial, every fear, every whispered prayer had brought her to this moment of quiet triumph. Even when God's presence seemed silent, He had never abandoned her. Every obstacle had been a step in a divine plan, every moment of doubt transformed into courage. And in her heart, she knew, faithfulness always bears fruit, often in ways no one else can see. At the palace gate, Mordecai watched the streets of Susa one last time before retiring for the evening. The city thrived, not just in safety, but in hope, courage, and generosity. That Mordecai's heart swelled with quiet pride, not for recognition, but for the knowledge that integrity and faith had shaped a nation. He thought of every choice, every act of obedience, every moment of patience, every risk taken in faith that God's hand had guided him, unseen yet unwavering, proving that even the humblest can become instruments of salvation. Throughout Susa, laughter, music, and prayer intertwined. Families gathered in courtyards, sharing food, recounting stories, and giving thanks, every heart lifted in gratitude, recognizing that courage, unity, and faith had brought deliverance. Even those far from the palace felt the ripple of Esther and Mordecai's courage, proving that righteous acts, though unseen by many, leave enduring legacies. The city itself seemed to breathe joy, a living testimony to the enduring power of God's providence. From that day forward, Purim became a festival of remembrance. Every year, on the 14th and 15th of Adar, the Jewish people celebrated deliverance. Gifts were exchanged, the poor were helped, feasts were shared, and children learned the story of courage and faith. The festival symbolized the eternal truth. God's plans unfold through ordinary people, and even the smallest acts of bravery can shape history. In every laugh, every meal, every prayer, the spirit of Esther's courage and Mordecai's wisdom lived on. And so the story of Esther and Mordecai concludes, yet its message endures. Even when the world seems silent, God is at work. Even when fear threatens to paralyze, courage can rise. Even when danger looms, faith prevails. Perhaps you too are placed for such a time as this. Your act of courage, your whispered prayer, your choice to stand for truth may be the next chapter in God's unfolding story. The God who saved a nation through an orphaned girl still moves unseen, weaving redemption, justice, and hope, and your story may be next. Dearly beloved, if this prayer has touched your heart and blessed your spirit, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Your subscription is more than just a click. It is a seed of faith. When you like, share, and subscribe, you help to spread God's word to millions worldwide, to those in need of hope, healing, and deliverance, and to believers who pray together, stand together, and rise together in God's presence. Click subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and never miss a prayer. Share in the comments section how God has blessed you, leave a word of encouragement, or tell us about a divine encounter. Your breakthrough may come through the next prayer. Stay connected, covered, and lifted. God bless you abundantly.